Next up, I'm pleased to introduce Alfred Lin, who's a partner at Sequoia Capital, one of the top investors in Silicon Valley and the world. He serves as a director on a bunch of awesome Silicon Valley companies like Airbnb and House. And before that, he was the CFO of Zappos. He's worked in startups for a long time. So we'll have a chat over here.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks for having me.
All right, cool. Thanks for being here. So let's just start off in the early days and tell us like how you got started with your first startup at Link Exchange.
Well, so I knew Tony and Sanjay in college, and originally Tony. So I came out to the Bay Area 1 year before Tony. He had originally wanted to scope out a place on campus at Stanford to open up a Subway's franchise because he was always into food. Before that, he and I had met through his pizza business, and I told him, I'm sorry, there's already one on University Avenue. It happened to be a half mile away from the university, but and at the time the university would not allow commercial entities to be on campus. So I said, you know what, when you come out here, you're probably gonna have to do something else. So he and Sanjay came out to the Bay Area. They were working for Oracle and they were extremely bored. So they started a company on their side building websites. And they had built these websites. They had put their hearts and souls into making them beautiful at the time. This is 1996, 97. So not a lot of people knew how to code in HTML. And they were solving a problem that a lot of people wanted a website because the web was coming up to speed. And they built these great websites, but there was no traffic. So they're like, geez, we spent all this time on this, and so how do we get these websites to get traffic? And if you had budget, you can go buy advertising on Yahoo or AOL or MSN at the time, but if you're a small website, how do you get traffic? And that's the problem that they experienced and the problem that they went out solving. And so they linked these websites together, and so that became like an interesting thing. And they linked them so that if you showed a banner on your site, you'd get to show a banner somewhere else in the network. And as the network grew, the network became more and more powerful because of network effects. And we had some pretty interesting companies that were part of that network. And when we sold the company to Microsoft, it arguably had the largest audience on the web at the time.
How did they get you to join Link Exchange? Like, what was the conversation like? What were you doing?
Well, I was in a PhD program in statistics, and as Tony would like to say, that's like watching paint dry on the wall in the dark. Look, I love numbers, and I really enjoyed what I was studying, but I did have a passion for business, and my parents, being very traditional Asian parents, had this hierarchy of jobs that you can get. The highest type of job you can do is to be a scholar and contribute to society. Then if you can't do that, then be a doctor. And then if you can't do that, be a lawyer. If you can't do that, be an engineer. And all the way down on the list is to be in business. So it was a hard conversation with my parents for me to leave my PhD program. But I'd known Tony and Sanjay for a long time, and they were people that I'd bonded with in college. And so they needed someone who could work on the finance side, and I told them I had no experience in finance, but I'm happy to learn. I'm good with numbers, and I became VP of Finance at Link Exchange.
And how did you guys, in the early days, get your initial customers? Like, what was when you decided to do Link Exchange, what was the process like to actually build it into a big company?
Well, so they had initial websites that they had already built. That was part of the sort of thing. They had basically pivoted their way. It was a nice little side business by being able to charge per hour to create these websites, but it was not very scalable. And they decided, you know what, we're going to forgo all this money, we're going to forgo all of it, and we're going to just try to get people to join the network. And back then, there was this directory called Yahoo, so they went down to some of these websites that were very popular and reached the popular ranks in Yahoo, and they just contacted them and asked them, would you like more promotion? And of course, everybody would say yes, and they joined. And the network got more and more powerful, and it got easier and easier to sell the next company to join because of the network effects. You're arguably better off joining Link Exchange, after the last person had joined. And so one of the more interesting things is one of the very early people who joined was a company called AuctionWeb. Nobody probably ever heard of AuctionWeb, but if you go to Wikipedia and look up eBay, you'll see in the very early days their original name was AuctionWeb. So even companies like eBay needed promotion back then. Of course, they're worth $65 billion, and we were only able to sell the company for $265 million. So they had a much better business.
How did you guys end up having that conversation about selling the company once you had this business, it was generating revenue, and how did you decide what you wanted to do with it?
I think it was our first company. We had, Tony has been very public about this in his book. We had hired people that were in it to, they're basically, let's just call it mercenaries. They wanted to they joined the company because it was a rocket ship. The metrics looked exponential from the growth perspective, and they were trying to build enough of a business so they can monetize the company. And day by day went by, and the place became less and less fun to work at. And we had decided that, this is our first company, and it was a good offer, and we decided to sell the company. And arguably, we sold the company too early. And it was a difficult decision, but I think everybody was pretty happy after the fact because we all got to do what we wanted to do. Tony and I thought the very, very early days of the startup was a lot of fun. So after we sold the company to Microsoft, we left and started a small angel fund called Venture Frogs in 1999. Probably the worst time ever to start a fund, right before the .com crash. But we got, I wouldn't say that we were smart, we just got lucky because we invested in some pretty amazing companies like Ask Jeeves and OpenTable and a few others that got sold pretty quickly in 1999, 2000. And then we made 27 investments. We went through a fund. We were supposed to invest that fund over 2 or 3 years. We invested in the fund, I think, in 9 months. Another not such great idea. But we were left in 2000 and 2001 with basically a portfolio of 20 companies. 7 of them we thought were sold or were going to do fine without us. And then we looked at the 20 and we thought to ourselves, well, most of these are going to do well or not do well despite our help. We're going to go focus on 2 companies. One was Tell Me Networks and the other was Zappos. And so I spent some time at Tell Me Networks. At the time, the company was losing, when I joined as VP of Finance, they were losing, I think about $60 million a year. They had just come off 1999 where they had been able to raise $265 million. It was the first time I thought, well, most companies learn how to pivot and deal with things when they have so little money. And this is the first time when I saw a company that actually raised so much money that it was a bad thing. And I didn't know that could be a bad thing until I saw how much money you can blow because everything was just not worth your time anymore because you had so much money in the company. And it's not the discipline of necessarily the CEO of the management team. It becomes ingrained in the company. It's like, well, we have this amount of money in the bank. Should we just use that money to experiment versus being thoughtful about where you want to spend and invest your company's money?
So what happened at Tell Me? How did you turn this ship around?
We became very, very focused. The company had been focused on a consumer business. We pivoted to the enterprise, selling. And Tell Me, for those who you don't know, it was originally started as a voice portal, as a voice recognition portal. So you would call 1-800-555-TELL, and you can ask it any question. We pivoted to the enterprise, and we started to automate using voice recognition 1-800 numbers. And it was arguably one of the first SaaS companies, cloud companies in the world. We had to build our own recognition servers, we put in the cloud. And so we got very, very focused on the enterprise, very, very focused on a few select customers, not trying to get any customer that we could sign up. We were very, very targeted on 12 to 24 customers and making sure that those were large contracts and very, very multi-year successful engagements. And then when I left the company to join Zappos, we basically went from 0 revenues to about $150 million in recurring revenue and a pretty stable cash generating business. And that was a year later sold to Microsoft for $800 million or so.
So pretty successful. Seemed to work out.
It was fine.
How did you, so at the same time you guys, through Venture Frogs, right, had funded Zappos, right? So why did you fund Zappos? How did you find them?
Well, Zappos found us, and it was Nick Swimmer, who was the founder, left a voicemail, which we almost deleted. I think Tony had his hand on his finger on the delete button of the voicemail because he started saying, I have this crazy idea. I want to sell shoes on the internet. I know nobody else will want to buy it on the internet because people have to try on shoes, and then if you had deleted it, you wouldn't have heard the but the shoe business is a $40 billion business, and 5% of it, or $2 billion, was already being done on mail order. Now, the investment thesis that the internet was going to be bigger than mail order carried the company. It was consistent all the way through. I'm not saying the company didn't have to pivot or had lots of struggles. It had tons of that, but we got that right, and Nick got that right, which was key, and it allowed the company to focus on building a business that people thought couldn't be done. And I think it's actually great that founders build businesses that logically should exist, but people don't think that it can, because if logically it should exist and you solve a real need, then people want that service or that product. And if people think it can't be made, it can't be done, or it can't be made, or it can't for whatever reason exist, then you have a situation where you don't have a lot of competition in the very early days, where you do need to pivot, where you do need to learn, where you need to figure out your standing in the marketplace. And that was a very powerful proposition for Zappos. And another powerful thing for Zappos, it was a bit of a blessing, mostly a blessing, but also a curse, was that Zappos could never raise a lot of money. And Zappos had to figure out how to generate revenue and do it profitably relatively early.
So after you guys invested, it was really hard to raise money?
Yeah, originally we thought, we'll put $500,000 in, and then we'll just hit the next milestone, we'll put another $500,000 in. Eventually we were $2 million into the company. Nobody really wanted to fund it in 2000, 2001. So we had to keep going, and as Tony has written in his book, he sold his apartment, a few of his apartments that he had acquired after Link Exchange was sold, to sort of put more money in the company. And so it was a long road of doing things, making personal sacrifices, employees taking less salary than they would like, but it all eventually worked out. But it was a painful process through all of that.
Were there any times when you guys were ready to throw in the towel and say this is not going to happen?
I don't think we wanted to throw in the towel. We just didn't understand why people didn't see the world the way we saw the world. And we kind of thought, well, it's a pretty big market out there just in the United States. Why wouldn't people back this? And there are reasons why people didn't back us back then, right? There are lots of e-commerce companies in 1999, 2000, 2001 that raised a ton of money and then blew it all on customer acquisition. And these were smart people. And I think some of the sort of thinking was good and some of the thinking was not so good. But the thing that people did was they sort of calculated their lifetime value on a small base of customers and figured out how much they can spend on marketing. And they spent, basically lifetime value minus a penny, a dollar, whatever it is. And there's no margin for error. And if you model things it doesn't always work out like the model says. And secondly, your early adopters are probably, the long-term value of your early adopters are probably higher than the later adopters, and people had not taken that into account. And so companies that raised 25, 50, $100 million, and in some cases billions of dollars, came and gone in the e-commerce space. But so what we did was we tried to be profitable on the first order, which was not heard of back then. It's probably not heard of now.
So how did you, what were the things that you learned at Link Exchange that really informed what you were doing at Zappos?
I think the thing that we learned at Link Exchange was that we wanted to build a company that was very, very, very much focused on having a great culture. And so at Zappos, we decided that we're going to focus on making sure that the culture is part of the everyday sort of operating principles. And I think a lot of companies start out with great cultures, and eventually they end up not having great cultures because you don't focus on it. You focus on your day-to-day things that you're supposed to do, and you forget that the culture is only good if you invest in it. And I just point out to people when they were taking tours at Zappos at the time, how does this place remain focused on culture day in and day out when it gets to be big? And it's like a daily habit. I think the thing that culture and customer service and fitness and staying healthy all have in common is you can try to do it in upswings and downswings, but if you don't make it a daily habit and focus on it on a daily basis, it's not going to really be your core competency. And if you want customer service or anything, or your culture or anything else to be a core competency, you have to focus on it on a daily basis.
So you went from being an investor in Zappos to joining as a operator. How did that conversation go? How did you decide that you needed to do that?
Well, I think there was Tony had joined early on as an advisor to Nick, and then eventually full time, and then eventually Nick decided that Tony should be CEO, and I had finished up my tour at Tellme, and it was the one company we thought we could make great. And we had basically Venture Frogs was money from friends and family of ours, and we wanted to make sure that even though it was a 1999 fund, and a lot of angel funds or venture funds decided that they could take a big write-off for that year, we decided that was not going to be the case. We at least had to make sure that we provided capital back, if not a good return. We wanted to make sure that we provided a good return, and so basically it was something that I felt personally responsible and compelled to make sure was successful. Tellme was a very interesting experience where they had too much money, it was overcapitalized, and I would say Zappos was another story where they were undercapitalized for a long period of time. There are very few e-commerce companies that have been built with less than 10 million of primary equity invested in it. Zappos had only about $10 million of primary equity invested, and then had used debt and a revolving line of credit to build its business, borrowed from their merchants to sort of continue to build its business. And it was very scary sometimes because leverage is great on the upside. It also can kill you on the downside.
What was the scariest moment?
There are a lot of scary moments. I think so Link Exchange, we almost missed payroll a few times. That sort of hardens you once you have to go through that once or twice or three times. By the time it was the 10th time, you just kind of say, all right, we'll figure it out. And so Zappos had many of those challenges too before I joined. When I had just gotten married, and I had just basically sort of convinced my wife that we're going to go move from San Francisco to Las Vegas, where Zappos had moved to, and then Tony tells me that we had this revolving line of credit. It had temporarily been increased from 30 to 40 million. We had used all 40 million of it at the time, but because of a glitch in an algorithm of a markdown mark-up process, we had sort of over-ordered a bunch of stuff, and we had to sort of mark that down And so therefore we're going to take a loss this quarter, which would, I'm like listening to all this, I'm like, come on, what's the big deal? It's like, which was going to cause us to break one of our bank covenants. And I'm like thinking, what did I just do? I just quit my last job. I had convinced my wife we're moving to Vegas. We had just sold our house. And then we're going to pack up. So I heard that. As soon as I heard that, it got on the phone, and we just figured it out. We just tried to figure out how to. So we had to find $10 million because the line was going from $40 to $30 million in about a month, and we had to find $10 million to reduce our debt by $10 million and make all the payments and not miss payroll and things like that. That was pretty hairy. But we got through it. I think, once you get through it once or twice, you know that you can get through it again. 1999, 2000 was a very interesting time. It was a lot of ups, and then 2000, 2001 was a lot of downs. I think 2005 and 2006 were starting to get out of those downs for a lot of e-commerce companies, and then 2008, 2009, there was a lot of downs. I think you just have to, as Hiroki said, you have to be an emotional rock and be able to absorb these shocks to the system. And if you can do that, you can persist and continue to go on.
Was Zappos growing the whole time, like throughout those times and ups and downs?
Yeah, Zappos is growing throughout those times, but it was growing in an inconsistent rate. And I think the hardest part about startups is the plan for what's going to happen. I think if you're building a product, the great thing about software today is if you're building a software product that's in the cloud, you can provision perfectly. And anything that requires hardware, it requires inventory, it requires servers, provisioning, space, etc. If you're off, you can be significantly off because compounding works in mysterious ways, and you can be off a lot. And if you bought too much and you're off, then you have too much inventory. You bought too little and you're off, you may miss out a bunch of sales. Missing out on a bunch of sales is not as bad as being laden with a bunch of inventory, but it's not good either. Neither side is good.
What are some of the most innovative things that you think you did at Zappos that really kind of made the company what it was? You talked about the culture. Were there technical things or ways that you were?
I think the culture was very important. I think you're building a company that was focused on customer service. That was very important. So focus on customer service when back then nobody really focused on customer service. If you said to me today, I'm building the Zappos of another category, it's probably not as interesting. But if you solve a hard problem and make that your core competency, I think that's a very, very important lesson, because first of all, hopefully that hard problem you've lived and you're personally passionate about and you're solving it. It's probably because there are other people who face that hard problem and make that a priority in their lives and find value in that. So we found that lots of people miss the fact that stores provided actually good customer service and online provided not so great customer service, and we're going to bring that back. So that was another innovation. I think the fact that we were running our distribution center and our call center 24/7 was seemingly, today may not seem like an innovation, but back then it was. We had figured out ways of picking, when you place an order, we would pick, pack, and ship within 4 hours, whereas other people were batching them the next day and sending it out. Little things add up. And so we figured out how to get products to people after they ordered them between 5 to 7 days when we started, and then eventually we cut that time little by little by little to overnight before we sold the company to Amazon. So I think those things were all very innovative. Obviously, we had some other technology advantages, such as we had a warehouse that every single item had a unique license plate number assigned to it, so we knew exactly where it was in inventory. So we had close to 100% accuracy in inventory management, which had not been heard of before in direct-to-consumer fulfillment. And so those are some examples.
Cool. So, I mean, you talked about selling the company. After surviving all these different ups and downs for years and years, how did that conversation come about? How did you make the decision?
Well, Amazon had, it was actually disclosed in both Tony's book and the recent book about Amazon. Amazon had been following the company and wanted to buy the company for a long period of time. They had started to compete with us, and they made an offer that was much more compelling. Most of the time, acquisitions would happen. You would get absorbed by the parent company. Here's a situation where still Zappos today is a separate brand, a separate business, has a separate culture and a separate location, and left to the current team there to run as a wholly owned subsidiary but a separate business. And that was much more compelling than being absorbed into a mothership.
So what are some of the lessons that you learned throughout, Zappos, or what do you know today that you wish you knew in the beginning about starting startups?
I think, a lot of the things that we just talked about, you want to continue to progress and not give up on your big dream. You need to sort of maybe make calls and pivot and write off certain things, et cetera, but the course is, as people have pointed out here, non-linear, and pivoting is okay, but you don't want to give up. The second thing is, I think companies that get started by personal passion and solving a personal pain seems to do a lot better than those that do not. Third is those charts that are sort of exponential growth. If you do, in all these talks, if you sort of narrow it down to the very early beginnings, it looks very, very flat. It takes a long time to get the flywheel going. And so don't be discouraged if the flywheel hasn't gone as smoothly as you expected it to go. But just keep at it, get stronger and stronger every single day at what you think the core problem that you're solving for. And when you sort of pivot and you think about what the next thing that you're trying to do, solve a real hard problem that nobody else is solving. And find a core competency that you can own and you can talk about. All the companies that you've heard on stage today, whether it's Stripe or HomeJoy or Go Payless, all these companies are trying to solve problems that they had personal pain with, and they had to sort of get the flywheel going over a number of tries. So
now you've moved back to the Bay Area, become a professional investor again, and working at Sequoia. What do you think? How do you think companies should ideally try to work with their investors? What do you think a good VC does?
It's funny that you asked that question. I used to be I've been on both sides, and I think it's a privilege that I've been on both sides. And I think the reason I joined Sequoia is that, personally, I think it's a very special place because most of the partners there have worked at companies, started companies, been part of the management team of companies that have done pretty extraordinary things. And we don't see ourselves as investors. We're not looking to buy low and sell high. I think that's what you should look for in someone who's an investor. You want a partner, you don't want an investor. And that's probably something that I would coach all of you to sort of think about. The other thing is, often pitches are very short. We're trying to assess you, you're trying to assess us. I would just sort of point out a statistic that you should think about, which is, people date for many years and they get married, or they decide to have a partnership, whether it's marriage or a business partnership, and 50% of those relationships still end up breaking up or in divorce or breaking up. So I would spend more time getting to know your investors before you let them invest in your company, because if things go well, it's a 5, 10, 15-year journey. So that'd be my advice.
So you guys have invested in a very high percentage of some of the top YC companies. How did you, how do you pick the companies that you work with?
Well, we've been very, very fortunate to be in business with YC for many, many years, since the very beginning. And I think we try to understand who the founders are. Again, back to what I said before, we're looking for people we want to work with for the next 5, 10, 15 years. We're looking for founders that are unstoppable, will not stop at anything, will figure out ways to get to the next level. We're looking for people who have deep insight into an industry and have asked why and why again, and challenge all the assumptions on the whole industry that they're trying to disrupt, and decide that these are the 5 things that they're going to try to do, not 100 things. These are the 5 things that they're going to do to disrupt the industry, and have a clear sense of what that wedge into that industry would be. And so we hear the early days of trying to sort of start Stripe or Airbnb or Dropbox. All of them had very clear reasons why they were going to be a disruptive force in their particular domain or their particular industry.
Cool. I think we're running out of time, so thanks a lot for joining us.
All right, thank you.